it's time for us to check back in with the thread that runs so true. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. Spring brought a new life to all of us. We went back to the field to play ball. We played ball while the girls played croquet. Then we went to the river and dropped our nets. We set our trout lines. It was great fun to get back to the Tiber in the spring. This clear blue water from the limestone country was beautiful, flowing under the fronds of the large willows. Like the Tiber River people, I had come to know this river and to love it. I even tried to write poems about it. This river whose lullabies of rippling water sang me to sleep every night. This river where I had fished, hunted, and skated, where I had walked in the autumn and had seen the golden leaves float like so many ships sailing to a far-off destiny beyond this valley and these hills. The banks of this river, where the trees first leafed and bloomed in spring, I had learned to love. It had become a part of me. Our school year was coming to a close. We had covered the entire contents of each textbook. We had started over these books again for the last review. I did not have a pupil fail a course. I had 2 pupils make average grades. The other 12 ranged from good to superior. The only B's Budge Waters made in his life in school were 2 in algebra. I had never had a discipline problem. Pupils had gotten along better than if they had been brothers and sisters. They respected me as much as if I had been their father. I had taught them, had hunted and fished with them. I had accepted and loved the recreation they had made for themselves and for me. I had been one of them even though I was their teacher. One day after school, while I sat on the bank of the Tiber fishing, I heard the green sycamore leaves swish behind me. I was getting a bite on my hook when it happened, but the fish suddenly stopped biting. He must have heard the noise too. A big man wearing a gray suit, cap, white shirt, and bow tie came through the brush. "Here I find this great teacher fishing," he laughed. "I'd like to be doing the same thing this time of year, but business," he sighed, "keeps me tied down. I'm Larry Kenwood," he introduced himself, gripping my hand. "I'm chairman of the Lansboro City School Board." "I'm glad to know you," I said. "Well, to come to the point," he said, "the Lansboro City Board members have decided to hire you for principal of Lansboro High School for this coming school year. It's a big school, and your main problem will be discipline. But you have a good reputation, and we've decided you're the man. Mr. Charters resigned to take another job." I was so stunned I couldn't speak for a minute. "Will you be interested?" he asked. "Of course," I finally said. "Then meet with us second Tuesday of next month in the Lansboro High School office," he said. "I'll be there," I said. And the chairman of the Lansboro City School Board was off as suddenly as he had come. After he had disappeared beyond the cloud of tender sycamore leaves, it was hard for me to believe he had approached me to take this big position. It was big to me. Only 5 years ago, I had graduated from Lansboro High School. I had entered Lansboro High School by taking an examination. I had passed this examination, making an average of 78 after having approximately 30 months of rural school training. I had been perhaps the poorest trained pupil ever to enter the high school, and now I had been invited back to become principal. I had been called polecat at high school because I had hunted in the autumn and was scarcely ever without a little of the scent. I won't be called polecat now, I thought, as I caught the fish that had been biting before Mr. Kenwood had come. 9 years from the time I entered, I go back to take over. Why did they ask me back, I wondered. Because Winston High School had defeated Lansboro High School in the scholastic contest. That was the only reason. That was why they had heard of me. That was why they had come for me instead of my going to them. It was the reputation of my pupils that had brought me this unexpected advancement. It wasn't that I was a good teacher. I had good timber to work with. I had taught the ambitious descendants of a landlocked people who for the first time in their lives had the advantage of high school training. They had made the best of it. They had repaid me for everything I had done for them. They had given me their best. I had given them my best. They would return soon to their plowing and planting, to their work beneath the sun, wind, and stars, in their valley of mist and tender voices of spring. And I would return to college to take courses in education, to prepare myself for the greater school task ahead. Part 3. I stump my toe, and down I go. Now you see who was right, Dad reminded me that September morning. You'll never regret the advice your Ma and me gave you. Remember when you bummed your way home with a college education in your head and you planned to go back to the Auckland steel mills? See, my son, Dad explained with a sweeping gesture of his hand, you're on the ground floor of the Greenwood County schools. It's not been 6 years since you followed your trap lines to and from the school and sold animal pelts to buy your books and clothes. Now you go back and take over this big school. I'm proud of you, Jess. The boys I work with on the railroad section are proud of you. Old Daddy Melvin talks about you all the time. Pert Snyder, our boss, is nicer to me than he's ever been. He doesn't put me down under the fields anymore to carry big cross ties up the steeps to the track. Jess, you keep on, and you'll amount to something. He's already amounted to something, Mitch, Mom said as she fixed Dad's lunch. He's already made his mark in life. He's done more than any of your people, or any of mine, but Everett Hilton. Everett's finished college, and he's a school teacher, too. You'll never have to make your living, Jess, like I've made mine, Dad said as he put his heavy leather gloves with holes worn in the palms into his hip pocket. You'll make your living with a pencil behind your ear. 5 miles to and from my work and 10 hours a day on a railroad section will get the best of the strongest men. Takes a strong back and a weak mind to stand it. Hurry, Sal, fix my dinner. I'll be late if you don't. I've not been late in 12 years. Dad picked up his battered old dinner bucket from the table. This is a great day for me, Jess, he said. You handle the school. Don't let it handle you. Stick to your 30 hours a week like I stick to my 60, and you'll make a go of it. Dad closed the kitchen door behind him, and he was off in a hurry, with his lighted lantern in one hand and his dinner bucket in the other. I could see him in the dim halo of yellow lantern light move through the September dawn across the pasture valley and up the orchard hill to the ridge road. I could remember he had advanced from digging coal in a mine where he had to crawl back on his belly like a snake. The roof was brittle and the coal vein was thin. After coal digging, he tried farming. He moved from one farm to another. We rented 8 different farms in W Hollow. Then he got the railroad section job, which was the best he ever had. I knew it wasn't the person who had an education that knew the value of one. It was a man like my father who couldn't read and write. It was a woman like my mother who had gone only to the 2nd grade, and this was the reason they were so proud of me. That was why my mother had thought, when I was made principal of Lansboro High School, that I had made my mark in life. I didn't tell my father that he had made more money working on the railroad section than I did when I taught at the Winston High School. My father could average $75 a month straight time working on the section. If he worked overtime, as he often did during the winter months, sweeping snow from the switches, he got time and a half. And often when there was a train wreck on his division and his section crew was called out on Sunday, he got double time. He averaged better than $75 a month for 12 months a year. At Winston High School, I got $100 a month for 8 months. Averaging my salary over 12 months, I made $50 a month. After I paid my board, I had $75 left. But I had other expenses, and I bought many little things for my school. I had never told my father and mother that when I went to Peabody College to do a summer of graduate work in courses I thought would help me with principalship of Lansboro High School, I had to borrow money from the Lansboro National Bank. I had saved approximately $200 after I had paid Lincoln Memorial the $100 I owed for college expenses. I hadn't been able to work out all my expenses in my senior year, when I was busy with many school activities, and with a little less than $300, I had gone to Peabody College for the summer, since this college for teachers had been recommended to me as the Columbia University of the South. I took courses in English, philosophy of education, extracurricular activity period program, and education. There were teachers, principals, city and county school superintendents in my classes. I met many of these educators and sat under the famous tree of education, whose branches were drying at the top and whose green leaves were then curling in the sun. We discussed high school management and high school problems. After I had hitchhiked home from Peabody College, I had my first teachers' meeting. It was on the Saturday before the Monday when Lansboro High School would commence. For the first time, I met the teachers I would work with. I hadn't recommended one of them. I had been told at Peabody College by a famous teacher and educator that a principal should recommend his teachers since he had to work with them. Then his superintendent and the members of his Board of Education should hold him responsible for the outcome and growth of his school. But while I was away at Peabody College, my teachers had been hired. Not one was a native of my county, for we still had less than 10 native college graduates. One was from an adjoining county, one from New York City, one from Lexington, Kentucky, and 4 were from near Louisville, Kentucky. Larry Anderson, superintendent of Greenwood County Schools, and the joint Greenwood County Board of Education and the Lansboro City Board of Education had done the hiring. When I was a pupil in Lansboro High School, it was an independent city school system. Now it had joined with Greenwood County, and Larry Anderson was superintendent of both city and county schools. However, they still had 2 school boards. After I met my teachers, I thought Larry Anderson and his Board of Education had made good selections. It was certainly a young faculty. Coach Watson, the oldest of our faculty and the only married one, was 26. The ages ranged down to my age, which was 23. Only 3 of our faculty had high school teaching experience. My 7 teachers and I had approximately 280 pupils to teach. I had to carry a full teacher's load to keep my teachers from being overloaded, for the state had passed a law that limited the number of pupils to each teacher. Yet it loaded the teacher with 1/4 more pupils than he should teach if he was to do a good and thorough job. I thought when I knew the number of teachers on the faculty and the number of pupils we would have to teach, that only the very young teachers could stand the load. Perhaps even they couldn't. I didn't know. Not even about my own load. I wondered if I could do it. There was definitely a point in their hiring a young faculty. We worked in unison when we made our schedule. We laughed and joked about our work to come. I didn't laugh when I went to see about my pay. When I had been hired principal of Lansboro High School, I asked how much I would be paid. I was told my salary could not be determined until the superintendent had some idea about the per capita money from the state and an estimate of county school taxes had been made. Then I was told a schedule for paying teachers would be worked out and I would be paid accordingly. I had thought that I would receive approximately $1,500 for 9 months, but when my superintendent told me I would receive $111 per month, I was dumbfounded. I was on the same salary schedule as the teachers. One of my teachers made more than I did because she had more experience. If this sort of thing was just, then all the teaching at Peabody College was wrong. I couldn't very well back out now, not when my coach, with a wife and 2 children, was teaching a full schedule and coaching after school for $100 a month. I got up from the superintendent's office and walked silently away. I knew how I could cut living expenses. I could stay home, where I would pay less for room and board. I could walk over the same path and climb the same high hills that my father had climbed for 12 years going to and from his work. I could walk over the old path that I had followed 4 years to Lansboro High School. Dad had made this path when he had started working on the railroad section. I had never told my mother and father how much Lansboro High School paid me. I told them I wanted to stay home and pay them board. They laughed when I told them I would pay them board. They were glad to have me home again. My father had gone in a hurry towards Lansboro at 5 that morning. That gave him an hour to walk to his work. I was ready and on my way at 7. My day didn't begin until 8:30. That gave me an hour and a half. I didn't want to walk fast enough to raise a sweat and wilt the collar of my white shirt in the mild September weather, because I knew from high school experience that walking 5 miles over a country road, I would have to watch my clothes. I knew my pupils would see each defect in my clothing, each speck of dirt on my shirt or spot of mud on my shoes. I was careful where I stepped and how fast I walked. I was careful as I could be about touching the fringe of ragweed, Queen Anne's lace, smartweed, and sprouts that bordered my path. My father had knocked part of the dew from their leaves, stems, and blooms with his overall legs, but there was still enough left to wet my pant legs. I had to walk directly in the center of the path until I reached the wagon road in Academy Hollow. When I reached Lansboro High School, 3 big buses were unloading county pupils. Many of these pupils had come from farms 15 miles away. They too had to rise early and often had to walk long distances before they reached the highways to catch the buses. The majority of these pupils had their morning chores to do on farms before they could start to school. Many had to rise as early as 4 in the morning. All of the teachers were there, but the Lansboro pupils who lived the closest, only a few blocks away, were the last to reach school. To my surprise, 8 of my 14 Winston High School pupils were there. Budge Waters had walked to Lansboro to follow me. The first thing I did was greet my Winston High School pupils. I asked Budge where he was staying. He didn't have a place to stay or money to pay for board and lodging. I told him to go home with me. Others had secured boarding houses in Lansboro. Red-headed Jess Jarvis, 180 pounds of energy, had come from his father's farm in Tiber Valley to go to Lansboro High School and play football. Coach Watson was talking to him. While the new pupils met each other and their teachers, we let time run over. We began school a few minutes late. There were 3 times as many pupils in Lansboro High School now as when I was a pupil there. The schoolhouse was the same size as when I had graduated. When all the pupils were inside, we didn't have room to seat them. We had to use my office for a classroom. We had to mark off the west section of the upstairs corridor for another classroom. We had to borrow chairs and tables from a local church to give our pupils a place to sit and work. 4 pupils were assigned to each locker. My first half day at Lansboro High School was interrupted by pupils who had been expelled the year before. They asked in good faith to be reinstated. Many asked if they could make up last year's work, since they had been expelled just a few weeks before the school year was over. They were intelligent-looking youths with good, steady eyes. My brother, James Stuart, was one of these. One of the first things I had done was to reinstate him. Now I reinstated them. I didn't even ask why they had been expelled. At the noon hour of my first day at Lansboro High School, I noticed a last year's sign beside the walk that read, "Keep off the grass." Beneath the words, in smaller print, the sign read, "If you don't, you will be punished." This means you. I didn't like that. It made me want to step on the grass. I made a new sign and put it back on the same spot. "Please protect the grass." My pupils reacted well to that new sign. They knew that we were working for and not against them. They understood the difference between threatening and leading. We had 2 acres of backyard where our pupils didn't have to watch the grass. I later learned that one of the pupils I had reinstated had been suspended the year before for walking on the grass. We'll stop right there for today. A real turn of events. Now, we left Jesse there in Winston, in the Tiber Valley there at Winston High School with his students that they all got along so good, and now he's been dropped into his old high school, which is a much bigger high school. I love that opening part when he's talking about that basically things at Winston High School had got back to normal, and then it was spring, Tiber Valley in the spring, and he's using that beautiful descriptive language of the river there, and how he had skated on it, and fished in it, and the trees alongside, and in spring and then autumn. Just beautiful, beautiful imagery that Jesse Stuart's known for. After that, he starts talking about how well they got along, how well his students and him had got along, how there had been no discipline problems there, and they'd hunted together, they'd played games together, they'd skated together, they'd went, sledding together, they'd done all those things. They'd learned a lot together, they made up those games, remember? And there was never any discipline problems, and they just really got along good. Makes me wonder if part of the reason, probably just that was a really great group of kids. It's funny, when Corey and Katie were young, they were in elementary school, one of their teachers told me that sometimes it was like that. It was it's just, there was no rhyme or reason to it. She'd been a teacher for a long time, that sometimes there was a class that was just kind of the whole class had trouble, whether they were trouble with academics or discipline or whatever, and then there'd come along a class that was just easy. Everybody got along, and there was no real discipline problems, and academically everybody was, it was kind of easy for them. She was telling me that because that was what the girls' class, that all the teachers agreed that's what that grade of that group of kids as they went through, that's what they were. Anyway, so that's interesting. It could be that, but I wonder if it's because Jesse was so young. He was practically like one of them, he was just so young. I wonder if that was it, is that he was just such on their same, I guess, wavelength, if you will, that he was still interested in those same things, the entertainment. You imagine them joking and kidding and stuff out. They probably were still, he was young enough that he still understood the jokes and stuff. I don't know if you've been around, like me, sometimes when I'm around younger, like teenage level folks, and they're telling jokes and they're saying stuff, and I don't really even know what they're talking about. They're using different slang and all that. So maybe that was part of it. Maybe that was another thing, that he just got along with them so good because he was so close to their age. Then comes the surprise. Really interesting that the man comes and finds Jesse. So I think Jesse's right. Why they wanted him to come back and be principal is because this word's got out about this amazing teacher. And you kind of say the proof's in the pudding. Well, the proof was, for sure, they might have heard rumors or heard, people talking about Jesse and how he'd made these real differences, maybe even at Lonesome Valley, but then there at Winston High School. But definitely then when they had their those contests, then that was obvious, And part of that, I'm sure, was like, Budge Waters. Humans like that are not, he's not the average, he's not the ordinary, somebody with that photographic memory and just that a real knack for learning and remembering things, that's not the average. So part of that was, I'm sure, was Jesse's great teaching, but part of that was he had really good students who were really bright and really interested. Sometimes you can be really bright but not interested in school. Corey and Katie kind of fell into that category. They were interested. They were really bright, but they was never very interested in school. Paul was like that too until he reached college. Now, I don't think I was all that bright, but it wasn't that I was so interested, it's just that I just wanted to do good. I just wanted to make good grades so that, I wasn't like the valedictorian or anything like that. I just wanted to make like a good, solid grade, and more so that I just blended in and I didn't stick out, I think, was for me. I did enjoy learning stuff, but I wasn't like those students, for sure. So you can see why Lansboro really wanted him. I like that imagery of Jesse sitting there fishing, and he hears something in the sycamore leaves, or the branches, and he looks around, and here comes this man with his suit and his tie and all that, and then tells Jesse. And I guess it was really, that would be really a powerful feeling, where Jesse had worked so hard to go to Lansboro. Then he talks about how they'd made fun of him because he had to walk those 5 miles, and he was probably showed up in his clothes, where he was walking. And then because he hunted to pay for his school, he smelled like a polecat. Well, if you don't know what a polecat is, that's a skunk. So sometimes he smelled of skunk. So, you can see how they would have made fun of him for being like the country bumpkin, out of not living right there in Lansboro and having to walk and all that. So I'm sure that was a powerful feeling for him, like, okay, you made fun of me and, didn't really welcome me, and now I'm coming back and I'm going to be in charge. So I'm sure that was a really Really powerful feeling for him. I really liked the part about when he's back at home there and he's done and went and took his little college classes, and the conversation with Jesse's parents. You can tell even before this that other parts that he shared, they're really, really proud of him. They're really proud of him. And part of it is, like he says, is because neither one of them are very educated. His father can't read or write, so they just really put stock in that. So I really like that every time he talks about them, and you can hear that pride in their voice, and you can hear that he loves them, that tight-knit family. I really, really love that. I also like, though, that when Jesse's daddy's telling him, you'll never have to make your living like I have, by the sweat of your brow, basically, working hard. Now, I'm not saying that teachers don't work hard. They do. But in Jesse's daddy's mind, he was thinking about physical hard labor. He was thinking, you won't have to do that. And, of course, Jesse, he's told us all this stuff he did to make extra money, when he was in college, and then in high school he trapped and done all that. So he's no stranger to hard work. It's not that. But his daddy's just saying, you won't have to work as hard as I did. And I like that part. It reminded me of when my brother Steve, he had jobs and worked and just kind of always knew what he wanted to do. He ended up, most of his career was spent as a gas man. I say, not delivering gas, but working on tanks, setting tanks and gas lines and all that for people. And of course, I moved out to Canton and worked at Lake Logan, and then I went back to college, and then I started working at the college. So, sorry, something went on with the chickens. I thought for a minute maybe something was after them, but I think it was just one of them. Anyway, when it come time for Paul to graduate high school, and Paul will tell you this, I should interview him sometime, that would be interesting, but he was smart, but he didn't care about school. He didn't care nothing about it, so he just barely made C's and got by all through elementary school and high school too. He just didn't care. But then when you graduate high school, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And so Daddy, he told him, said, if I was you, I'd go to school and be a school teacher. And he told him some of the same reasons that Jesse's daddy told him. You won't have to work out in the cold like I do. You won't have to work in the rain. You get time off in the summer. You get your holidays off. You do what, you have good insurance. You'll have a retirement, all those kind of things. If I was you, that's what I would do, and you'll have an easier time. And Paul really listened to him. He didn't have no burning desire to be a teacher. It wasn't that he was against it, but he just didn't, some people just say, I want to teach. It's really inside me, I want to do that. It wasn't like that for Paul, but he's like, okay, I'll be a teacher, okay. So that was how he ended up going into the education system. And he was a teacher for many, many, many years, language arts, and then he went through a fellowship program and to get his master's degree and become a principal. And then he was a principal for the rest of his career, and he retired last December, if you missed that. So he says, he's on the day of his last day of school, like I texted him that morning and said, congratulations. I know this will be like a bittersweet day or whatever. And I said, Daddy would be proud of you. And he said, that's funny. I've already thought about him this morning and thought, you're the one that got me here. If I listened to you, and here I am, because time goes so fast in our lives, Here I am about to retire, a very young man, and all because you instructed me or give me advice about going into the education system. So I really liked that part. Before we leave Jesse's daddy, though, thinking about that, though, his job, Jesse kind of goes through, he dug coal, he was a farmer. And being a coal miner in those days, he says he had to crawl around on his belly basically, and he's trying to dig either below him or above him. I'm claustrophobic, so I couldn't stand that. But then he tried farming, and then it was finally when he got that job at the railroad that he finally had steady pay. And even though it was really, really hard work, that was the best he'd had it, and he's still there 12 years. But 12 years of walking 5 miles to and from work, 5 miles. And then, he goes into how, I was talking about the money part in a minute, but he goes into that and telling about how his daddy actually made more because he made those time and a half. So if there was, snow, or if a train derailed or something, so that might have been on Saturday or Sunday. So that would have been another day that he was walking basically 10 miles, back and forth. I just can't imagine. I think about sitting right here where I'm at. If I decided I was going to walk 5 miles, it would almost be like when I worked at Tri-County, if I just walked to work every day, if I had to walk there and back. And that's just, It just seems insurmountable to me. Of course, those were different times, and that's all people knew about walking and stuff. But really impressive. And then that he had never been late. He'd never been late. Never been late. I wasn't late often. I was somebody that liked to be early. Pap instilled that. You got to leave early because you never know what might happen. But there was certainly times in my career that I was late when things just went wrong, or there was a child sick, or there was whatever, something, somebody in the road even, something happened, my car tore up, whatever it was, and I ended up being late. And sometimes it's just my own fault. And then talking about the salaries, when he was talking about his daddy, how much his daddy had made and could make more money by working to remove the snow, or working if there was a train derailment. And then poor Jesse, he barely makes anything. Every job he thinks he's going to make, he's going to have more money, his salary's going to increase, and it just doesn't really increase to fit what he is. So now he's principal of this high school, biggest high school there, and he's not even making as much as his teachers make, Makes you feel sorry for him, and you can hear he's frustrated, and you can see that he's embarrassed, and that's why he don't tell his parents. And probably too, he don't want them to be hurt, like they're so proud of him. He don't want to burst their bubble, I guess, if you will. But really amazing when he goes through that about his salary and what he makes, and there again, it'd be really great if he lived in Lansboro, but he thinks, I can't do that. I'm going to have to just walk those 5 miles like my daddy. I'm just going to have to do it. So that's really interesting. And I thought it was interesting too. It's kind of convoluted, hard to figure out, but when he's talking about the school board and the county and the schools it's like there's about 3, it sounds like maybe more than one person overseeing that school. So we will run into that later in the book, but that's kind of your first hint at that it's kind of convoluted the way it's run. And then the last thing I noticed was Lansboro had grew. It was there were so many more students there, and they had to make his office a classroom. They had to put a classroom in the hallway. They had to borrow chairs and tables so that they had a place to sit. They didn't have enough desks. So you got to wonder, did that just naturally happen? That does, of course, happen in different places. Both happens. Maybe a school system is drained of students because people leave and they're moving, some kind of migration happens to where they move out, and all of a sudden the schools don't have anybody in them anymore. And then the opposite happens, wherever all those people move to, then all of a sudden their school is increasing and they run out of room. So it could be something like that, just like a little migrational thing. A lot of people move there. But I have to wonder if it's because of Jesse being a teacher, being principal, that they'd heard what a great teacher he was and how he'd done all these things, and now he's principal. And if everybody was like, I'm going to go there, or maybe I wasn't going to finish high school, I wasn't even going to go to high school, but now I'm going to go back because I heard Jesse Stuart's there. I don't know, makes you wonder which of those two things it was. I hope you enjoyed this part of the book, and leave a comment, please, and tell me what jumped out at you. And I hope you drop back by next week, because now we got to see what happens to Jesse now that he's principal of Lansboro High School.